Grace Holloway thought she had it all. A billionaire husband, a mansion in Greenwich, twin babies on the way. Until the day she walked into his office and found him with her best friend. What happened next wasn't just betrayal. It was conspiracy, fraud, and a criminal empire worth billions. They took everything from her home, her money, even tried to take her children, but they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated the woman they destroyed. This is the true story of how a pregnant wife brought down a tech billionaire, exposed an international crime ring, and built an empire from the ashes of her marriage. If you love stories of revenge and redemption, you're in the right place. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe because this gets wild. The necklace felt like a noose around Grace Holloway's throat. $2 million worth of diamonds caught the candlelight at per se, casting rainbow shadows across the white tablecloth. Across from her, Derek Sullivan raised his champagne glass, his smile as polished as the silverware. "To 5 years," he said smoothly, "and to many more." Grace touched her glass to his, the crystal singing a note that somehow sounded like a warning. She'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, choosing the perfect black dress that still fit her thickening waist, timing the announcement for dessert, imagining his face when she told him. "Derek, I have something to tell you." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, just for a second, but Grace saw the name on the screen. Bridget, her college roommate, her maid of honor, the woman who'd helped her pick out this very restaurant. "Sorry," Derek said, silencing it. "Go ahead." Grace's hand moved to her stomach, a gesture that had become automatic in the past 12 weeks. "I'm pregnant, with twins." The words hung in the air like smoke. Derek's smile froze, his champagne glass hovering halfway to his lips. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't move. Then he set the glass down, very carefully. "That's wonderful, Bob," he said, but his eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere cold and calculating. "Excuse me for just a moment." He stood, kissed her forehead, and walked toward the restrooms. Grace watched him go, watched him pull out his phone before he'd even rounded the corner. The diamonds around her neck suddenly felt very, very heavy. She'd met Derek 6 years ago at a gallery opening in Chelsea. He'd been a nobody then, just another tech entrepreneur with big dreams and a studio apartment in Brooklyn. She'd been working as a junior interior designer, still paying off student loans, still believing that hard work and talent mattered more than connections. They'd built his company together. While Derek coded and pitched investors, Grace had designed every office space, every conference room, every detail that made Sullivan Technologies feel like the future. She'd sat beside him through all-nighters, celebrated every funding round, believed every promise. Somewhere along the way, Derek had stopped being the man in the coffee-stained shirt and become someone else. Someone who wore $15,000 suits and forgot to come home. Someone whose assistant knew his schedule better than his wife did. Someone who looked at the news of twins like a death sentence. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Bridget. How did he react? I bet he cried. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Grace typed back. He seemed happy. The lie tasted bitter. Derek returned 10 minutes later, his smile firmly back in place. "Sorry about that. Crisis at the office." He reached across the table, took her hand. "This is incredible news. Grace, really, I'm just in shock." "Good shock?" she asked quietly. "The best shock." He squeezed her fingers. "We'll need to start planning. Nursery, nanny, everything. Bridget can help, right? She's been dying to be more involved." There it was again, Bridget's name in his mouth, casual as breathing. Grace nodded, smiled. Let him order dessert. But something had shifted in her chest, some instinct she'd been ignoring for months. She thought about the late-night texts, the perfume on his collars that wasn't hers, the way Bridget always seemed to be at their house, always staying just a little too late, always laughing just a little too loud at Derek's jokes. The dessert arrived, chocolate and gold leaf, beautiful and insubstantial. "To us," Derek said, raising his glass again. Grace drank, but the champagne tasted like ashes. Across the restaurant, a woman in red was watching them, her phone raised, taking photos. Grace recognized her vaguely from the society pages. Tomorrow, they'd be in magazines again. The golden couple, the tech billionaire and his designer wife. The perfect American success story. If only they knew the truth, Grace thought. If only she knew it herself. The earring was small, delicate, silver with a tiny pearl drop. Grace found it on Derek's nightstand 3 weeks after the anniversary dinner, half hidden behind a lamp. She picked it up, held it to the light. She knew these earrings. She'd helped Bridget choose them 2 Christmases ago at Tiffany's. They'd laughed about the price tag, agreed that Bridget deserved to splurge after her promotion at the PR firm. Grace's hand closed around the earring until the post bit into her palm. The bedroom door opened. Derek walked in, phone pressed to his ear, barely glancing at her. "No, tell them we need the revised projections by Friday. I don't care if it's Thanksgiving." He hung up, started loosening his tie. Then he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Grace opened her hand, showed him the earring. "Why is this here?" Derek looked at it, then at her, his expression shifting from confusion to something like annoyance. "Bridget crashed here last night after the fundraiser. You remember you weren't feeling well. Went to bed early. Why was she in our bedroom? She had a migraine. I gave her some of your Excedrin from the bathroom." He took off his jacket, hung it carefully in the closet. "Grace, you're reading into something that isn't there." "Am I?" He turned to face her fully then, and his eyes were hard. "You've been on edge since you got pregnant. Everything is a crisis. Everything is suspicious. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Frost about adjusting your anxiety medication." The words hit like a slap. Grace felt her breath catch, felt the old familiar tightness in her chest that signaled a panic attack building. Derek knew exactly where to press, exactly which scars to reopen. She'd been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in college, after her mother's death. For years, she'd managed it well, until the pressure of Derek's rising empire, the constant scrutiny, the endless social obligations had made it worse. "I'm not being paranoid," she said, but her voice shook. Derek's expression softened, or pretended to. He crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. "Honey, you're carrying twins. Your hormones are all over the place. I love you. Bridget is our friend. That's all this is." He kissed her forehead, the same gesture from the restaurant, and Grace felt something inside her begin to crack. "I have an early meeting," Derek said, moving toward the bathroom. "Get some rest." The door closed. The shower started. Grace stood alone in their bedroom, the earring still clutched in her fist, and wondered when exactly she'd become someone who doubted her own sanity. Her phone rang. Bridget's name flashed on the screen. Grace answered. "Hey." Bridget's voice was bright, cheerful. "How are you feeling?" Derek said. "You had a rough night." "I'm fine. Listen, I wanted to apologize if I overstepped last night. Derek was so sweet to let me crash, but I should have just called a car." The apology was smooth, rehearsed almost. Grace closed her eyes. "It's fine, Bridget." "Are you sure? You sound weird." "I'm just tired." "Well, get some rest. Oh, and I'm stopping by later with some baby catalogs. We need to start planning the nursery." Bridget laughed. "This is going to be so fun." Grace hung up without saying goodbye. She walked to the window, looked out at the manicured grounds of their Greenwich estate. 6 acres of perfection. A pool she never swam in. A tennis court she never used. A life that looked beautiful from the outside but felt like a cage. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, pale and uncertain. At 28, she was supposed to be in her prime. Instead, she felt ancient, hollowed out. The shower shut off. Derek emerged, toweling his hair, already scrolling through emails. "I might be late tonight," he said. "Investor dinner in the city. Will Bridget be there?" The question came out before Grace could stop it. Derek's jaw tightened. "She's our head of PR, Grace. She's at every major meeting." "Right. What does that mean?" "Nothing, Bizarre. Grace set the earring on the nightstand. "Have a good dinner." She left the room before he could respond, walked down the curved staircase into the kitchen where morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. The housekeeper wouldn't arrive for another hour. Grace made coffee she wasn't supposed to drink, just to have something to do with her hands. On the counter, yesterday's mail sat unopened. She flipped through it mechanically. Bills, invitations, a letter from her brother Todd. She opened it. Inside was a single sentence in Todd's messy handwriting. Grace, I need help. Call me. Her phone rang again. Not Bridget this time. An unknown number. Mrs. Sullivan. A man's voice, smooth and professional. This is James Porter from Whitfield and Associates. I'm calling regarding a legal matter. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? What kind of legal matter? A pause. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. It concerns your husband's business dealings. 2 o'clock at our Tribeca office. Grace's hand tightened on the phone. I'll be there. She hung up, stared at the letter from Todd, thought about the earring upstairs and the lights that were piling up like snow. Something was coming. She could feel it the way animals sense earthquakes, a trembling in the foundation of everything she'd built. Outside, a car door slammed. Through the window, Grace saw Bridget climbing out of her Mercedes, carrying shopping bags, her smile bright as a knife. The doorbell rang. Grace stood, frozen, coffee cup in hand, and wondered if she was brave enough to face whatever truth was waiting on the other side of that door. Grace never made it to the lawyer's office. At 11:30 that morning, 22 weeks pregnant, she stood in the doorway of Derek's private office at Sullivan Technologies and watched her entire world collapse. Derek, on his desk, Bridget beneath him, her legs wrapped around his waist, her designer blouse torn open, her head thrown back in a performance that looked practiced, familiar, routine. Grace's shopping bags hit the floor. The sound made them freeze. Derek turned, saw her, and for one perfect second, his face showed nothing but animal panic. Then the mask slammed back into place. Grace, this isn't... Don't... Her voice came from somewhere deep and cold. Don't you dare. Bridget sat up slowly, smoothing her skirt with hands that didn't shake. She met Grace's eyes and smiled. Actually smiled. He was going to tell you this weekend anyway, Bridget said casually, buttoning her blouse. We just wanted to wait until after the Thanksgiving gala. Bad optics. You know. Grace couldn't breathe. The room tilted. She grabbed the doorframe. How long? She whispered. Derek climbed off the desk, zipped his pants. Grace, let's talk about this at home. How long? 2 years. Bridget answered. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at Manhattan like she owned it. Since the Series B funding round. You remember, don't you, when you were so busy redesigning the Boston office? 2 years. Grace did the math. That meant her anniversary dinner had been a lie. Their vow renewal last summer had been a lie. Every I love you, every touch, every promise had been rotting from the inside while she designed their dream home and planned their future. The babies, Grace said. Derek, I'm carrying your children. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes destroyed her more completely than the affair ever could. There was no guilt there, no shame, just cold calculation. I need someone who fits my world now. Grace, he said quietly. You were good for the early days, for building the company, for the scrappy startup image. But I'm playing in a different league now. Bridget understands that world. She's connected, sophisticated. She's not me, Grace finished. Not you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Grace's legs gave out. She slid down the doorframe, her vision tunneling, somewhere far away. She heard Bridget laugh, heard Derek's phone ring, heard the sound of her own heart breaking with such force she thought everyone in the building must hear it. Security will help you to your car, Derek said, already turning away, already back to his phone. My lawyer will be in touch about the separation terms. This separation. The prenup is very clear. Grace, you get the brownstone your mother left you, $50,000 and 6 months of health insurance. Everything else stays with me, including the Greenwich house. Grace stared at him. That's our home. It's my house. You signed it Heirs when we bought it. Remember, quit claim deed. It's all in my name. She didn't remember signing anything like that. But there were so many documents in their marriage, so many contracts and agreements that Derek's lawyers had assured her were standard. I'll fight you, she said. I'll take you to court. Bridget turned from the window, her smile sharper now. You really want to do that? See, the thing is, we have evidence, photos, texts, hotel receipts. Your affair with Harrison Caldwell. What I've never, doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. Bridget continued smoothly. Matters what we can prove. And the prenup has a morality clause. Adultery voids all financial claims. You'll walk away with nothing. The room spun. Grace pressed her hands to the floor, trying to anchor herself to something solid. You're lying. You fabricated evidence. Try proving that in court, Derek said. Jay, my lawyers versus your what? You don't even have a lawyer. Grace, you don't have money. You don't have anything. He was right. Every account was in his name. Every credit card. Every asset. She'd been so focused on their partnership, on building his dream, that she'd never protected herself. She'd never thought she'd need to. Two security guards appeared in the doorway, their faces professionally blank. Mrs. Sullivan needs help to her car, Derek told them. Then to Grace, don't come back here. Don't call me. My lawyer will contact you in 72 hours with the settlement paperwork. Sign it, and this ends quietly. Fight it, and I'll bury you. The guards lifted Grace gently. Professionally, she didn't resist. Couldn't. She was drowning in air, suffocating in space. As they led her through the office, past assistants who wouldn't meet her eyes and junior executives who'd been at her dinner parties, Grace saw Bridget lean in to kiss Derek. Saw him smile. Saw them turn back to the window, already forgetting she existed. Outside, rain had started to fall. The guards helped her into her car, an SUV registered in Derek's name that she suddenly realized could be taken from her at any moment. She sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and tried to remember how to be human. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Bank accounts will be frozen by end of business day. Take what cash you need now. Then another, Dr. Wallace will no longer be seeing you. Find a new OB. Bridget and I will need him for our own pregnancy. Our own pregnancy. The words detonated in Grace's chest. She gasped, clutched her stomach, felt the twins moving inside her like they knew. Like they understood that the world they were about to enter was already broken. She drove, not home to Greenwich. There was no home anymore. Not to Brooklyn. She couldn't face that emptiness. She drove until she couldn't see through her tears, until the rain and the darkness merged into one endless blur. Then she pulled over, and she screamed, and nobody heard. Grace woke on the floor of her mother's Brooklyn brownstone with no memory of driving there. Rain hammered the windows. Her phone showed 47 missed calls, none from Derek. Most were from numbers she didn't recognize, probably reporters. One was from her brother Todd. 3 were from a blocked number. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her face felt swollen. Her body ached. When she tried to stand, pain shot through her abdomen. The twins. Panic flooded her system. She called Dr. Wallace's office. The receptionist's voice was cold. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan is no longer a patient here. Grace hung up, called her backup OB, got the same answer. Derek had been thorough at the ER in Brooklyn Methodist. A nurse took her vitals while avoiding eye contact. Everyone had seen the news by now. The tech billionaire leaving his pregnant wife, the best friend turned mistress. It was already trending on social media. Babies are fine, the doctor said after the ultrasound, but your blood pressure is dangerously high. You need to reduce stress. Grace almost laughed. The doctor prescribed bed rest, handed her a referral to a high-risk pregnancy clinic, and left her with a bill for $4,000 that she couldn't pay. In the parking lot, her credit card was declined. Derek had been fast. Mrs. Sullivan, Grace turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood beside a black sedan, holding an umbrella. He was maybe 40, with graying temples and eyes that had seen things. My name is Harrison Caldwell, he said. I'm an attorney. I'd like to help you. I can't afford a lawyer. I'm not asking for money. He stepped closer, blocking the rain. I'm asking for the chance to destroy Derek Sullivan. Grace stared at him. Why? Because 6 years ago, your husband stole my identity to secure fraudulent investments. When his scheme collapsed, I took the fall, lost my law firm, my reputation, my family. My wife couldn't handle the scandal. She left, took our daughter, died in a car accident 3 months later. His voice was flat, but Grace heard the rage underneath. Cold and patient. Derek destroys everyone he touches. Harrison continued. But he's gotten sloppy, arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. I've been building a case for years, waiting for the right leverage. You're that leverage. Grace, you're the inside witness who can bring down his entire empire. I don't know anything about his business. You know more than you think. You designed every office, attended every major event, met every investor. You've been in rooms where illegal deals were made. And more importantly, Derek underestimated you. He thinks you're weak, broken, harmless. That's his mistake. Grace's hands went to her stomach. Protective. I have my children to think about. Those children deserve a father who's not a criminal. Or at minimum, they deserve his money to be held in trust for them, not stolen by the woman who destroyed your marriage. Harrison handed her a card. I have a cabin in the Adirondacks. It's off-grid, safe. Stay there. Rest. Recover. When you're ready, we take back everything he stole. And if I say no, then you sign his settlement and live in this brownstone on $50,000 and explain to your twins why their father's new family has everything while they have nothing. He was right. Grace knew he was right. But accepting help from a stranger felt like stepping off a cliff. Why did Derek use your name specifically? She asked. Harrison's jaw tightened. Because we look alike, same height, build, coloring. He used fake IDs with my information to open accounts, sign documents. By the time I discovered it, the damage was done. And Derek was already too rich, too connected for anyone to believe me over him. Grace looked at the card. Harrison Caldwell, attorney at law, a phone number, nothing else. One day, she said, give me 1 day to think. You have 6 hours. After that, Derek's lawyers will have you sign papers that include an NDA. You'll never be able to testify against him. He got in his car and drove away, leaving Grace standing in the rain with a choice that felt like choosing which way to drown. Back in the brownstone, Todd was waiting on the steps. Her younger brother looked terrible, thinner than she remembered, with dark circles and a split lip. He stood when he saw her, tried to smile. Grace, thank God. I've been calling. Todd, what happened to your face? He touched the bruise, winced. That's actually why I'm here. I need help. It's bad this time. Gracie, really bad. How much? $200,000. The number hit her like a fist. Todd, I don't have that. Derek froze everything. I know, I saw the news. Todd followed her inside. But you could ask him, right? For your little brother, he always liked me. He's leaving me. We're getting divorced. I don't have access to anything. Todd sank onto the couch, put his head in his hands. Then I'm dead. These guys, they're not playing around. They gave me until Friday. Who did you borrow from? Guys who work for Curtis Shaw. The name meant nothing to Grace. Who's that? Nobody you want to know about. Todd looked up, and Grace saw real fear in his eyes. But here's the thing. They know about you. They know where you live. They said if I don't pay, they'll take collateral. And you're collateral now. Grace, you and those babies. The air left the room, so Grace sat down hard. They threatened my children. They threatened everyone. Curtis Shaw doesn't make empty threats. He's connected to some serious people, international people. Grace's mind raced. Harrison's offer suddenly felt less like a choice and more like her only option. How long until Friday? 3 days. Okay. Grace stood, grabbed her coat. I know someone who might be able to help. But Todd, this is the last time. After this, you need to get help. Real help. I will. I promise. He'd said that before. After their mother's funeral. After the last gambling debt. After every crisis that Grace had bailed him out of. But he was her brother. And right now, he was all the family she had left. She called Harrison's number. He answered on the first ring. Mrs. Sullivan, I'll take your offer, but I need help with something first. Name it. My brother owes money to someone named Curtis Shaw, $200,000. They're threatening my family. Silence. Then Curtis Shaw is Derek's silent partner in the crypto laundering operation. This isn't coincidence. Grace, they're using your brother to control you. The pieces clicked into place. Derek knowing exactly where to press, exactly how to isolate her. Can you help? Pack a bag. I'll pick you up in 30 minutes. And Grace, from this moment on, Trust no one. Not your brother, not your friends, not anyone who knew you before. Derek's reach is longer than you think. He hung up. Grace looked at Todd, who was watching her with desperate, hungry eyes, and wondered if Harrison was right. Wondered if her brother had sold her out without even knowing it. The cabin sat 40 miles from the nearest town, hidden in a forest so dense that sunlight barely penetrated. Harrison had driven in silence, taking back roads that weren't on any GPS, while Grace watched the city disappear behind them. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. One bedroom, a small kitchen, a fireplace, windows with heavy shutters, a satellite phone. No cell service, Harrison explained. No internet, no way for anyone to track you electronically. There's food in the pantry, firewood stacked outside. The property belongs to a friend who died 2 years ago. As far as public records show, it doesn't exist. Grace set down her single bag. Everything she owned now fit in one duffel. What about Todd? I made some calls. Curtis Shaw's people will be dealt with by end of week. Harrison's expression was grim. But your brother needs to disappear for a while. I've arranged transport to a facility in Vermont. Inpatient gambling addiction treatment. He agreed. You talked to him. Someone had to. Grace sank into a chair by the cold fireplace. Her body ached. Her mind felt like static. I don't understand any of this. 2 days ago I was planning a nursery. Now I'm hiding in the woods from criminals. Welcome to Derek Sullivan's real world. Harrison started building a fire. The tech genius persona is a mask. Underneath, he's a money launderer for international criminals. Curtis Shaw runs operations in 12 countries. They use Sullivan Technologies' crypto platform to move funds. Derek gets a percentage. Shaw gets clean money. How long have you known this? 3 years. But knowing and proving are different things. Derek's good at covering tracks. Every transaction goes through shell companies, offshore accounts, encrypted systems. He's untouchable. Then how do we prove it? Harrison struck a match, lit the kindling. Flames caught, spreading warmth into the cold room. We need access to his private servers, the ones in his Greenwich house, hidden behind the false wall in his office? Grace stared at him. How do you know about that? I helped design the security system before he fired me. He thought I wouldn't remember, or wouldn't care. He was wrong on both counts. Even if we got access, it's encrypted. Not if we have his biometric key, fingerprint and retinal scan. Harrison turned to face her, which means you need to get close to him one more time. He'll never let me near him. He will when you tell him you'll sign the settlement agreement. When you play the broken, defeated wife who just wants it to end, he'll want to gloat. Grace. Narcissists always do. The thought of facing Derek again made Grace's stomach turn. But Harrison was right. This was her only chance. When Shaw, after you've rested, after the twins are safe, we have time. Harrison pulled out a folder, spread documents across the table. First, you need to see what you're really up against. Grace moved closer. The documents showed wire transfers, account numbers, names she didn't recognize, millions of dollars moving through systems that looked legitimate but weren't. These transactions, Harrison said, pointing, all have your signature. Grace's blood went cold. I never signed these. I know. He forged them. If the SEC investigates, you'll be charged as an accomplice. Derek's already building the case that you were involved, that you're trying to save yourself by blaming him. But I'm innocent. Try proving that when you're 8 months pregnant in a courtroom against Sullivan Technologies' legal team, they'll destroy you. Grace, they'll make you look like a gold digger who got caught. Grace sat down hard. The walls were closing in. So what's my play? We expose everything at once, not just Derek, but Curtis Shaw, the entire network. We give it to the FBI in a package so complete they can't ignore it. But we need the source files from his private server. Everything else is circumstantial. And how do I get close enough to... A sound outside cut her off. Branches cracking. Movement in the trees. Harrison moved instantly, pulling a gun from his jacket. He motioned Grace to the back room. Stay quiet, he whispered. Grace crept into the bedroom, hard hammering. Through the crack in the door, she watched Harrison move to the window, peer out carefully. More sounds. Footsteps on gravel. Then voices. low and professional. "They found us," Harrison said. "Out the back window. Now." "Who found us? Does it matter? Move." Grace grabbed her bag, climbed through the window into the forest. Cold air bit her face. Behind her, she heard the front door splinter. Harrison fired twice. Then he was beside her, pulling her through the trees, away from the cabin. They ran until Grace's lungs burned, until her legs shook, until she had to stop or collapse. "Keep moving," Harrison urged. "I can't. The babies." A car engine roared nearby. Headlights swept through the darkness. Harrison swore, changed direction, pulled Grace toward the sound of running water. A creek, narrow and fast. He dragged her across, soaking them both. On the other side, they crouched in the underbrush. The car stopped. Doors opened. Men's voices, speaking in Russian. "Shaw's people," Harrison breathed. "They must have tracked your brother. You said he was safe." "I said I made arrangements. Nothing's safe with these people." They waded in the freezing water, Grace's teeth chattering, the twins moving frantically inside her. After an eternity, the car drove away. Harrison helped her up. They walked until they found a road, then followed it to a gas station where Harrison made calls from a payphone while Grace stood shivering in the bathroom. When he emerged, his face was grave. "Change of plans. We can't hide. They'll keep finding us. We need to go on offense." "How?" "We need someone on the inside, someone with access to federal resources, someone who wants Curtis Shaw as badly as we want Derek." "Who?" Harrison handed her a business card. "Special Agent Vanessa Price, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She's been investigating Shaw for 8 years. Every time she gets close, evidence disappears. Witnesses die. She needs a witness who can't be intimidated. A witness with nothing left to lose." Grace looked at her reflection in the gas station window. Soaked, exhausted, 8 months pregnant, on the run from criminals. Harrison was right about one thing. She had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Make the call," she said. Harrison dialed, and Grace Holloway stopped running and started fighting back. Special Agent Vanessa Price looked like she'd been carved from granite. 50 years old, gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, eyes that had seen every variation of human evil and remained unimpressed. She met them at a diner outside Albany at 3 in the morning, slid into the booth across from Grace and Harrison, ordered black coffee, and got straight to business. "Curtis Shaw," she said, pulling out a tablet. 48 years old, born in Moscow, naturalized 15 years ago, runs a network that moves approximately $3 billion annually through legitimate businesses. Real estate, tech startups, cryptocurrency platforms, smart, careful, and completely untouchable. She swiped through photos. Shaw at charity galas. Shaw shaking hands with politicians. Shaw looking like any other wealthy businessman. "We've been after him since 2017, Price continued. "Every case falls apart. Witnesses recant. Evidence corrupts. Judges suddenly develop conflicts of interest. He owns people we don't even know he owns." "Then why are we talking?" Grace asked. Her coffee sat untouched, steam rising like ghosts. "Because you're different. You're not a criminal he intimidated into testifying. You're collateral damage. A civilian caught in his web. Juries love that narrative." Price fixed Grace with a stare. "But more importantly, you have access to Derek Sullivan, who's sloppy in ways Shaw isn't. Sullivan keeps records, makes mistakes. If we get him, we can flip him against Shaw." "Derek won't flip," Grace said. "He's too arrogant. Everyone flips when they're looking at life in federal prison." Price leaned forward. "Here's what I'm offering. You wear a wire, meet with Sullivan, get him talking. We build a case, arrest him, and offer him a deal: testify against Shaw or spend the rest of his life in a cell. Meanwhile, we use the evidence to freeze all assets. That means the Greenwich house, the offshore accounts, everything, all held in trust pending trial. And guess who's named as the mother of his unborn children with a claim to those assets?" "Me," Grace said quietly. "You. We can't promise you will get everything, but we can promise Derek won't, and we can promise protection for you and your children." Harrison leaned back, studying Price. "What's the catch?" "The catch is your bait. Derek's smart enough to suspect a setup. If he figures out you're working with us, he'll shut down everything. No evidence, no case, and you become a liability that Shaw's people will eliminate. Grace's hands moved to her stomach. The twins kicked, as if sensing danger. How long would I have to wait before the arrest? Weeks, maybe months, long enough to build an airtight case. I'm due in 6 weeks. Price nodded grimly. I know. That's why we need to move fast. But Grace, I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. Shaw's people have already tried to kill you once. They will try again. Then why am I better off helping you? Because if you don't, Derek wins. He marries Bridget, raises their child in your house with your money. Your twins grow up with nothing, and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for Shaw to decide you're a loose end that needs tying up. The truth of it settled over Grace like snow. There was no safe option, no path that led to peace. She could run forever and die tired, or she could fight and maybe survive. What would I have to do, she asked. Price slid a document across the table. Call Derek. Tell him you'll sign the settlement. Tell him you just want to say goodbye, to get closure. He'll agree to meet, probably somewhere public where he feels safe. You wear a wire, get him talking about the business, about Shaw, about anything that connects him to illegal activity. He's too smart for that. He's arrogant. There's a difference. Arrogant people love to explain how clever they are. Give him an opening, and he'll take it. Harrison had been quiet, but now he spoke. What about protection if Shaw's people are actively hunting her? Safe house until the meet, then we shadow her every move. She'll never be alone. Your people couldn't keep the cabin location secure. Price's jaw tightened. That was on your end, not mine. Her brother talked. Todd wouldn't, Grace started. Todd told his bookie where you were going. The bookie told Shaw's collection crew. That's how it works, Grace. People you love will betray you without meaning to. It's not malice, it's weakness. And Shaw exploits weakness better than anyone alive. Grace thought about Todd, about his desperate eyes and empty promises, about how many times she'd believed him before. If I do this, she said slowly, I need guarantees. My brother goes into witness protection after treatment. My children are protected no matter what happens to me. And if I'm dying, every penny of Derek's frozen assets goes into a trust for them. Done, Price said without hesitation. And one more thing. Grace met Price's eyes. I want Bridget arrested too. She's been part of this from the beginning. If we can prove it, absolutely. Price stood, dropped cash on the table. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, my window closes. Shaw's too careful to leave openings for long. She left her card and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. Grace and Harrison sat in silence. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. An overnight trucker sat at the counter, eating pie and watching news on a small TV mounted in the corner. You don't have to do this, Harrison said finally. Yes, I do. There are other ways. We could leave the country, start over somewhere Shaw can't reach. Grace shook her head. I'm done running. I'm done being the victim in my own story. She looked at him. Why are you really helping me? Harrison, is it just revenge? He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. My daughter was 5 when my wife died. I haven't seen her in 4 years. Her grandparents have custody, convinced I'm a criminal. I send letters. They're returned unopened. I send birthday presents. They're never acknowledged. I'm sorry. Derek Sullivan stole my life. Grace. Every day I wake up knowing my daughter thinks her father is a fraud. If I can take him down, if I can prove what he did, maybe I get a chance to explain. Maybe she'll listen. That's why I'm here. Well, Grace reached across the table, squeezed his hand briefly. Then let's get our lives back. She picked up Price's card, pulled out her phone, and made the call that would set everything in motion, or destroy what little she had left. The safe house was a converted firehouse in Queens, all exposed brick and high ceilings. 2 FBI agents, Martinez and Cole, stayed on the perimeter while Grace spent 3 days being trained by Price's technical team. How to activate the wire, how to steer conversations toward incriminating topics, how to stay calm when every instinct screamed to run. They made her practice until her responses were automatic, until she could lie with Derek's own smoothness. On the fourth day, Grace called him. He answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd cave. Hello, Derek. Don't hello, Derek me. You ready to sign the papers? Grace closed her eyes, channeled every hour of coaching. Yes, but I need to see you to say goodbye properly. 5 years deserves that much, doesn't it? Silence. She could almost hear him calculating, weighing risks. Fine, tomorrow, 4 p.m., the rooftop bar at the Mondrian. Public, neutral. Bring the signed papers. I will. And Grace, don't try anything stupid. I still have all the evidence of your affair. One wrong move, and I'll bury you. He hung up. Price, listening on the speaker, nodded. Good. He's confident. That makes him careless. The next afternoon, a stylist transformed Grace into someone who looked put together despite falling apart. A navy dress that hid her pregnancy as much as possible. Professional makeup, hair pulled back. She looked like someone who'd made peace with loss. The wire was a small device taped between her shoulder blades, so thin she could barely feel it. A second microphone was built into her watch. Redundancy in case Derek made her leave her purse. Remember, Price coached in the van, you're not looking for a confession. You're looking for details, names, dates, transactions. Let him talk. Men like Derek love to explain how smart they are. What if he suspects? Then you leave. We got that agents stationed all over that hotel. You'll be protected. Grace wasn't sure she believed that, but at 3:45, she stepped out of the van and walked into the Mondrian Hotel like she was walking to her own execution. The rooftop bar was sleek and modern, all glass and steel overlooking the city. Derek sat at a corner table, already drinking scotch. He looked the same, handsome and predatory. Grace's hands shook as she approached. He stood, kissed her cheek like they were friends. You look good, it's very good, he said. Pregnancy suits you. Let's not pretend this is a social call. Grace set her purse aside, folded her hands in her lap to stop their trembling. Derek pushed a folder across the table. Settlement agreement? You get the brownstone, $100,000, and continued health insurance through delivery. In exchange, you sign an NDA and relinquish all claims to marital assets. Grace opened the folder, pretended to read. The wire was recording every word, every rustle of paper. What about the twins? They'll be provided for, college funds, modest support, but custody stays with me. You can't take my children. I can do whatever I want. Grace, I have 14 lawyers who make sure of that. He leaned back, swirled his scotch. You should have been smarter, should have protected yourself, but you were too busy playing house to notice the world changing around you. The world you built on fraud. His eyes narrowed. Careful. It's just us, Derek. You can be honest. The offshore accounts, the crypto schemes, Curtis Shaw. I know about all of it. You don't know anything. I know enough. Grace kept her voice steady, kept her face neutral. I know Sullivan Technologies is a front for money laundering. I know you've been using shell companies to move Shaw's money for years. I know the Series B funding was fake, funneled through accounts that don't legally exist. Derek's expression shifted from annoyance to something darker. Who told you that? Does it matter? It matters if you're planning to do something stupid like go to the authorities. He leaned forward. Because here's what you don't understand. Grace, the authorities already know. Half the people who could investigate me are on Shaw's payroll. Judges, prosecutors, even FBI agents. You think you can expose me? I'm untouchable. Everyone's touchable. Derek? He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You really believe that? You think you're the hero in this story? He pulled out his phone, showed her a photo. This is your brother, taken 2 hours ago in Vermont. Grace's blood froze. The photo showed Todd, clearly visible through a window. Shaw's people know where he is. Derek continued. They know where you are. They know everything. Grace? So here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign those papers. You're going to disappear. And if you ever try to come after me, your brother dies, then your kids, then you, in that order. The wire had it all. The threats, the admission of surveillance, the connection to Shaw. But Grace barely registered the victory because she'd just realized something terrible. Derek had known about the wire from the beginning. This entire meeting was a setup. "You can tell Agent Price she's got nice equipment," Derek said casually. "The wire, I mean, very high tech. Shaw's tech team spotted it the moment you walked in the door." Grace's heart stopped. "Derek, stand up slowly with him. We're going to walk out of here together. You're going to smile. You're going to laugh. You're going to look like a woman who just made peace with her ex-husband. Because if you don't, Shaw's people will shoot every FBI agent in this building. You're bluffing." "Am I?" He nodded toward the bar. Grace followed his gaze and saw a man in a server's uniform, his hand resting inside his jacket, another by the elevator, a third near the stairs. "They're everywhere," Derek said. "Shaw doesn't take chances. Now move." Grace stood on trembling legs. Derek took her arm, gentle and threatening. They walked toward the elevator, passing tables of people drinking and laughing, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding beside them. In the elevator, Derek ripped the wire from Grace's back. She gasped at the pain. He crushed it under his heel. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere quiet, where we can have a real conversation about your future, or lack of one." The elevator descended into darkness, and Grace realized she'd just lost it everything. Again, the elevator stopped at the parking garage, not the lobby. Derek pulled Grace through concrete corridors to a black SUV with tinted windows. Two men waited beside it, both carrying themselves with military precision. "Get in," Derek said. Grace's mind raced. Price's team would know something was wrong by now. They'd be tracking her, unless Derek was right, unless Shaw's people had killed them first. "Derek, please, I'm pregnant. Whatever you're planning." "What I'm planning is to save your life. Believe it or not." He pushed her into the back seat, climbed in beside her. The SUV pulled out, moving fast through Manhattan traffic. "Shaw wanted you dead the moment you started talking to the FBI. Derek continued. "I convinced him you're worth more alive. As leverage." "Leverage for what?" "For keeping your brother in line. For ensuring you never testify. For a dozen other things." He poured himself a vodka from the car's bar. "You were supposed to be easy, Grace. Sign the papers. Take your money, disappear. Why couldn't you just do that?" "Because you stole my life. I gave you a life. Before me, you were nobody. A mediocre designer from Brooklyn with student debt and a dead-end career. I made you somebody." The casual cruelty took her breath away. "You made me a prisoner." "Same thing, really." The SUV turned onto the West Side Highway, heading north. "You want to know the funny part? I actually did love you. In the beginning, you were real, uncomplicated, but you couldn't scale. Grace, you couldn't become what I needed you to be. So you replaced me with Bridget. Bridget understands power. She doesn't ask stupid questions about morality or legality. She just wins." He drained his vodka. "Which is why she'll make a much better mother to my children than you ever would." Something inside Grace finally, completely broke. Not with despair this time, with rage. "You don't deserve children," she said quietly. Derek laughed. "I don't deserve them. I built $1 billion company before I was 30. I command respect from people who could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. What have you done? Grace, what gives you the right to judge me? I'm not a monster. No, you're just weak. And in my world, weakness is worse than evil. At least evil has ambition." The SUV pulled into an abandoned warehouse district near the Gowanus Canal. Grace's heart hammered as they stopped beside a building with broken windows and graffitied walls. "Out," Derek ordered. Inside, the warehouse was freezing and dark. A single bulb hung from the ceiling. Beneath it stood Curtis Shaw, wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than Grace's car used to. He looked like anyone's grandfather, white-haired and distinguished, but his eyes were dead. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said in accented English. "We finally meet." Grace said nothing. Shaw circled her slowly, appraising. "You've caused considerable trouble, he continued. "The FBI is now investigating transactions I spent years concealing. Several of my associates are nervous. When associates get nervous, they make mistakes. I don't tolerate mistakes." "Then you should be talking to Derek, not me." Shaw smiled. A terrible expression. Derek is useful. You are not. But you are leverage, as he mentioned. Your brother, your children, your life. All useful tools for ensuring compliance. He nodded to one of the men. The man produced a syringe. Grace backed away. What is that insurance? Shaw said. A cocktail that will induce premature labor. You'll deliver those twins tonight, in a hospital where my people control the security. The children will be placed with Derek and his new wife. You will be admitted to a psychiatric facility for postpartum psychosis. A tragic case. Really, but quite common. You can't. I can do whatever I want. Mrs. Sullivan, I have been doing whatever I want for 30 years without consequence. Did you really think you and the FBI could stop me? Derek had turned away, staring out a broken window like this was boring him. Derek, Grace said desperately, they're your children too. Our children. They'll be fine, he said without turning. Better than fine. They'll have everything. The man with the syringe moved closer. Grace looked around wildly for an exit, a weapon, anything, but she was trapped. Then gunfire exploded through the warehouse. The window shattered. Shaw's men dropped, blood spreading across concrete. Derek dove behind a crate. Shaw himself vanished into shadows with practiced ease. FBI agents swarmed in. Tactical gear, assault rifles, voices screaming commands. Agent Price grabbed Grace, pulled her toward the door. We've got her fallback. But Derek, we'll get him, yet. Move outside. Price shoved Grace into an ambulance. Paramedics immediately hooked her to monitors, checking the twins. How did you find me? Grace gasped. Secondary tracker in your watch. The wire was a decoy. We knew Derek would find it. We counted on it. Price's face was grim. Are you hurt? No, but they were going to. Grace couldn't finish. Reaction hit her all at once. She started shaking. Couldn't stop. It's over, Price said. You did it, Grace. We got everything on recording. Derek admitting to the fraud. Shaw threatening you, all of it. They're both finished. But as the ambulance pulled away, Grace saw Derek emerging from the warehouse, hands zip-tied, and he was smiling. Actually smiling, like he knew something they didn't. The twins were born at 32 weeks, delivered by emergency C-section at Mount Sinai Hospital, while FBI agents stood guard outside. A boy and a girl, small but breathing on their own. Grace held them through tears that wouldn't stop, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. You're safe now, she told them. I'll make sure you're safe. But the fear wouldn't leave. Derek and Shaw had been arrested, held without bail pending trial. The news showed perp walks, federal prosecutors announcing the biggest financial crimes case in a decade, $250 million in assets frozen, 12 shell companies exposed, 14 arrests across 3 countries. It looked like justice. Grace knew better. On the third night in the hospital, Agent Price came to visit. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her usual confidence unshaken. We have a problem, Price said quietly. Grace's blood chilled. What happened? 3 witnesses have recanted. 2 have disappeared. The judge assigned to the case just discovered a conflict of interest and recused himself. And the replacement judge is Margaret Vincent. Who's that? Someone who took $1 million vacation home from Shaw's company 5 years ago. We can't prove corruption, but the timing is suspicious. Price sat down heavily. Grace, they're dismantling the case from the inside. By the time we get to trial, we might not have enough evidence to convict. But you have the recordings, Derek's own voice admitting everything, which his lawyers are claiming that was made under duress, that you seduced him into meeting you, wore a wire without his knowledge, used your pregnancy to manipulate him emotionally. They're painting you as the criminal. Grace, a woman scorned who fabricated evidence. That's insane. That's expensive lawyers. Price leaned forward. I need you to testify in detail about the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, everything you know. It's risky. They'll destroy you on the stand, but it's our only shot. Before Grace could answer, her hospital room door opened. Harrison Caldwell stood there, holding a folder. His face was grim. Don't testify, he said. Price stood. Excuse me. I found something. Harrison crossed to Grace, laid out documents. Derek's been planning this for months. He has a kill switch built into the company servers. If he goes to prison, every file gets wiped. All the evidence, all the backups, everything disappears. How is that possible? Price demanded. Because he's smarter than we gave him credit for. Harrison pointed to technical specifications Grace couldn't begin to understand. But here's the thing. The kill switch needs to be manually activated, and the only person with access is Derek himself, from a secure terminal, which he can't reach from prison, Price said, which is why his lawyers are going to get him bail. Harrison corrected. They'll argue flight risk is minimal. He's a respected businessman, blah, blah, blah. Judge Vincent will grant it. And the moment Derek walks out of that courthouse, every piece of evidence vanishes. Grace felt the walls closing in again. So we've lost. No. Harrison's eyes burned with cold fire. We just need to change tactics. Instead of trying to convict him, we destroy him first. What help us with? Grace asked. We leak everything, not to the FBI, to everyone, every journalist, every news outlet, every social media platform. We make it so public, so undeniable that even Shaw's money can't contain it. The evidence gets preserved by 1 million people before Derek can wipe it. The court of public opinion convicts him, even if a real court doesn't. Price shook her head. That's illegal. Destroying an active investigation, compromising federal evidence. And letting a criminal walk free isn't, Harrison shot back. Grace, it's your choice. Play by their rules and lose, or break the rules and win. Grace looked at her sleeping children, tiny and fragile in their hospital bassinets. Thought about Derek's smile as he was led away in handcuffs. Thought about Judge Vincent and disappeared witnesses and money that could buy anything, including justice. Do it, she said. Leak everything. Grace, I have to warn you, Price started. I don't care about warnings anymore. I care about my children never living in a world where Derek Sullivan has power over them. Harrison nodded. I'll need 12 hours by tomorrow morning. Every server in every newsroom will have the files. There's no taking it back once it's out. Then let it burn, Grace said. He left. Price stood silent for a long moment. For what it's worth, the agent said finally, I would have made the same choice. But officially, I can't know about this. Officially, we never had this conversation. Understood. Price moved to the door, paused. Derek's bail hearing is tomorrow at 9. If I were you, I'd be ready to move fast after that. When he realizes what's happening, he'll come for you. She left Grace alone with her children in a decision that might save them or destroy them all. Outside the hospital window, Manhattan glittered with 1 million lights, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in that city, Derek was planning his escape. Shaw was making calls. Lawyers were crafting defenses. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Grace Holloway wasn't afraid. She was ready. The story broke at 6 a.m. Every major news outlet simultaneously released documents showing the full scope of Sullivan Technologies' criminal operations. By 7, Derek's face was on every screen in America. By 8, the stock market had halted trading on Sullivan Technologies, wiping out $3 billion in market value. Grace watched from her hospital room as Derek's empire collapsed in real time. At 9:30, her phone rang. Harrison. Judge Vincent granted bail anyway, he said. $2 million cash. Derek posted it immediately. Where is he now? Unknown. He left the courthouse 20 minutes ago. Grace, he's going to run or he's going to come for you. Either way, you need protection. I have FBI outside my room. That didn't help at the warehouse. A pause. There's something else. Bridget Kane tried to cut a deal this morning. She's willing to testify against Derek in exchange for immunity. Grace felt nothing at hearing Bridget's name. The woman who'd been her best friend was just another criminal now, scrambling to save herself. Will they take the deal? Probably. She can corroborate everything in the documents. With her testimony, Derek doesn't walk away clean even if he wipes the servers. Good. Grace looked at her sleeping twins. What about Shaw? Shaw's already gone. Posted bail using diplomatic cover we didn't know he had. Fled to a country without extradition. But his American operations are destroyed. He'll never work here again. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. At noon, Agent Price returned with news. Derek's made a move. He's trying to access the secure terminal to activate the kill switch. But here's the beautiful part. The evidence is already distributed to 47 different servers worldwide. He can wipe the originals, but he can't stop what's already out there. So we won, Grace asked. You survived. Price corrected. Whether that's the same as winning, you'll have to decide. That night, as Grace nursed her daughter, her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered, "Hello, Grace?" Derek's voice, calm, measured, like they were still married and this was just another evening call. "How did you get this number?" "I still have resources you don't know about." A long pause. "I wanted you to know that I understand what you did. The leaks, the publicity. It was smart, ruthless. I'm almost proud." "I don't want your pride." "No, you want revenge. And you got it. My company's destroyed. My reputation's ruined. I'll be fighting criminal charges for years even if I beat them." "You won, Grace?" "Then why do you sound happy?" "Because I still have money you'll never find. Accounts that aren't in any of those leaked documents. Enough to disappear. To start over somewhere without extradition. Enough to live like a king while you raise our children in poverty." Grace's grip tightened on the phone. "You're abandoning them." "I'm being realistic. Those twins are leverage I don't need anymore. They're your responsibility now. Congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. A life without me." The line went dead. Grace sat in the darkness, holding her daughter, and felt something that might have been grief or might have been relief. Derek was gone. Really gone. Not in prison where she'd have to testify. Not hiding where she'd have to fear him. Just gone. She'd won. And the victory tasted like ash. 3 months later, Grace stood in the ruins of the Greenwich mansion. Federal agents had seized it, then released it when the asset forfeiture case collapsed due to technical issues that smelled like corruption but couldn't be proved. The house belonged to her now. Derek had never officially transferred it before his disappearance. His lawyers couldn't contest ownership when they couldn't find their client. Grace walked through empty rooms where she'd once planned her future. The nursery she'd designed sat untouched, waiting for children who would never live here. She made a decision. 2 weeks later, construction crews began converting the mansion into the Holloway Foundation for Women in Crisis. 20 bedrooms became apartments for domestic abuse survivors. The pool house became a child care facility. The tennis court became a community garden. Grace kept only one room, a small office overlooking the grounds where she ran the foundation that had become her new purpose. Harrison helped, his legal expertise invaluable in setting up the nonprofit. They never discussed what might have been between them. Some connections were born from trauma, not meant to survive peace. Bridget testified against Derek in absentia, then vanished into witness protection. Grace never learned where, didn't want to. Todd completed rehab, moved to Oregon, sent monthly letters Grace sometimes answered. Forgiveness was a process, not a destination. Agent Price closed the case without a conviction, but with enough seizures and arrests to call it a win. She sent Grace a bottle of wine with a note. "You did what I couldn't, thank you." On a bright morning in October, Grace sat in her office at the foundation, her twins playing on a blanket nearby. They were 8 months old, healthy, happy, unaware of the darkness that preceded their birth. A knock on the door. One of the residents, a woman named Sarah who'd arrived 3 weeks ago with nothing but bruises and fear. "Ms. Holloway, the reporter's here, the one doing the documentary." Grace nodded. "Send her in." The reporter was young, eager, recording everything. "Thank you for agreeing to this interview. The story of how you survived Derek Sullivan's betrayal has inspired millions of women." "I didn't just survive," Grace corrected gently. "I fought back. There's a difference." "What would you say to women in similar situations?" Grace thought carefully. "I'd say that sometimes the only way out is through. That justice doesn't always look like we expect it to. That winning doesn't always feel triumphant." She looked at her children. "But survival is its own victory, and what we build from the ashes matters more than what burned." The interview continued, but Grace's mind drifted. She thought about Derek, wherever he was, probably on some beach with fake IDs and stolen millions. She thought about Bridget, hiding from her own choices. She thought about all the people who'd underestimated her, who'd seen a pregnant woman in crisis and assumed she'd break. They'd been wrong. Not because Grace was particularly strong or brave or special, but because she'd learned something crucial in that warehouse, in that hospital, in all those moments when surrender seemed inevitable. The people who think they're untouchable are always wrong eventually. Power is temporary, money is meaningless, but the choice to keep fighting, to keep building, to keep hoping, that's eternal. Grace Holloway didn't get her fairy tale ending. She got something better: agency, purpose, and two children who would grow up knowing their mother had faced monsters and won. Not through violence or revenge, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to disappear. That night, after the residents had gone to bed and the twins were sleeping, Grace sat alone in her office. On her desk lay a letter that had arrived that morning, postmarked from a country she'd never visited. She opened it. Inside, in Derek's handwriting, "You were always stronger than I gave you credit for. I suppose I deserve this. The twins deserve better than me. Make sure they know that." Grace read it once, then burned it in the fireplace. Some closure didn't require acknowledgement. Some apologies came too late to matter. She turned off the lights, checked on her sleeping children one last time, and went to bed in the small apartment she'd made for herself on the foundation's second floor. Tomorrow, 3 more women were arriving, refugees from their own marriages, their own betrayals. She'd helped them the way Harrison had helped her, the way Price had fought for her. The empire Derek built had fallen. The empire Grace built would stand. And somewhere in the distance, the city glowed with possibility, indifferent to human drama, but beautiful nonetheless. Grace Holloway closed her eyes and slept, dreamless and free.